Car crashes. That's serious business for most of us. And beyond the insurance and the civil lawsuits that you may hear about, some of them can be criminal. Here to explain the difference between civil and criminal and, well, to spell it all out for us, basically, Tom Sinus from Sinus Dramus Law Firm. Hi, Tom.
Hi, Todd. How you doing?
Okay, break it down. I'm well. Thank you for asking. Break it down for me. I hear this all the time. Criminally charged, but acquitted, and then a civil lawsuit comes their way. What's the difference between the civil and the criminal lawsuit?
It is so easy to get all this kind of mixed up when you hear it on the news, you read about it in the paper. It's hard to remember sometimes that we have two separate justice systems, really, in the United States. We have a criminal justice system and a civil justice system. And to put it very simply, of course, in the criminal justice system, you are talking about consequences to the defendant that can include things like incarceration, taking away someone's liberty for conduct that violates our criminal statutes. On the civil side of things, you are primarily talking about claims for money damages. So you're not talking about the loss of liberty in a civil case. But where I think it gets confusing, what I think your question is really alluding to, is this idea that one act by a person or a series of acts by a person can result in them ending up in both justice systems at the same time. And this is not just limited to car crashes. It's the general idea that a person can violate a number of rules and end up not only being sued by someone else, but also being prosecuted in the criminal justice system by state government or the federal government. And these things can happen kind of at the same time, and there can be different outcomes in the different cases or similar outcomes in the different cases. They're, of course, governed by different rules, different standards of proof. But where I think the confusion comes in for people is keeping track of where in this justice system are we for this particular event, which part of the justice system are we in, and how do those two things relate? And as you alluded to in your introduction, in my practice, I see this quite often, I think more often than people would think, in instances involving serious car crashes resulting in injury.
So when it comes to a car crash that would result in a criminal prosecution, what do those look like? What's the distinction between a car crash that just could end up with a civil lawsuit versus criminal?
Great question. The distinction really comes down to the seriousness of the harm. So we have in Michigan statutes that say if you commit a moving violation, a violation of our motor vehicle code, and that violation results in a serious injury, what the law calls a serious impairment of a body function, then that can subject you to prosecution as a misdemeanor. That's a misdemeanor offense. If you commit a moving violation and that violation results in death, that also is a misdemeanor. Now, in those two instances, the driver who commits the violation is also going to very likely be subject to civil liability. They're going to likely be sued on the civil side. But right there, you see where there is serious harm and a driver who breaks the rules, that driver can be criminally prosecuted. In this case, the example I'm talking about is a misdemeanor, also subjected to civil liability. Now, if the harm is serious and the conduct is even more serious, and here I'm talking about intoxication, then the stakes are even higher in the criminal side. So if you are driving while intoxicated and you seriously injure someone, that's a felony. And that can subject you to a very lengthy incarceration period. If you are driving while intoxicated and someone else is killed, that's also a felony. And these are felonies that can lead, as I said, to very lengthy incarceration. And then, of course, also civil liability at the same time. So where I see these happening are circumstances where you have drivers who broke a rule of the road and someone who was either seriously hurt or killed. That is where there is this intersection and overlap of these two separate systems of our justice system coming together regarding one particular event.
That talks to the perpetrators of these crimes. What about the victims? What should they keep in mind?
Victims of crimes have certain rights under Michigan law. There's a lot of them. If you are a victim of a crime, hopefully you'll be put in touch with a victim witness advocate and you'll get some information about this. But here's some general common ones. I mean, victims of a crime have a right to be notified of what is going on in the criminal case, because what's unusual, and I speak from the perspective of a former prosecutor, is that in a criminal case, the two parties are the state and the defendant. So the law has given victims certain rights so that they don't feel like they are terribly on the outside of what's happening. So they have a right to be notified of what's going on. They have a right to be informed of, for example, a proposed plea agreement. They have a right to make an impact statement, a victim impact statement. They have a right to claim restitution. What's restitution? Well, it's generally those type of financial losses that are not otherwise covered by insurance. They have a right to claim that in the criminal case. And it's important that victims monitor what is going on in the criminal case, because not only do they have rights, but what goes on in the criminal case could also affect circumstances in the civil case if the victim has a civil case as well.
When it comes to these cases, do they happen concurrently, or does one have to happen before the other?
It's a great question. There isn't a must-do answer, but most commonly the criminal case goes first. And the reason that's true is because criminal defendants have a right against what's called self-incrimination. You hear that on TV all the time, and it's true. It's a constitutional right. Well, that implicates our civil case, because if the same defendant is being asked to, say, give a deposition or testimony in the civil case, that defendant may invoke his or her right against the privilege against self-incrimination if they have a pending criminal case. So usually, most commonly, you see the criminal case go first and the civil case sort of waiting, at least for certain things to perhaps resolve, because that criminal defendant has that right against self-incrimination and can be invoked in civil cases. And you see that reported on from time to time in the news when you have these parallel cases.
Breaking it down for us, as always, Tom Sinus, Sinus Dramus Law Firm. If you have any further questions about this, or unfortunately, we're in an accident, or maybe you are a victim and you're looking for representation, where can they get more information?
Well, they can find our law firm online at www.sinusdramus.com. They can give us a call in West Michigan at 616-301-3333, or shoot us an email, info@sinusdramus.com.